Thank you very much for having us, and I would ask the audience to please give another round of applause to Mr. Carlton Highsmith and Eric Lemons. Mr. Fernandez has given me permission to refer to him as Ben, which I'm grateful for, and easier for me to remember, not only because it is Ben, but also because my son's name is also Ben. Welcome to Comcat and welcome to New Haven.
Thank you, and thank you for your son taking my name.
He's proud to wear it.
Well, thank you.
You heard the introduction that Mr. Highsmith gave about your background. Is there anything that you would like to add to share with the audience a little bit about more about you?
Well, I'm married to the only Estonian I met in high school. I married her after, and we've been married for 55 years. And that's my wife, Siri, who's going to say, don't bring my name up, don't say I'm here. But there she is, sitting there. And as I say, I've been married 55 years with her. It's a job.
It's a job for her.
I guess so, yes. The other thing is these yellow boxes hanging from these blue wheels. It's very intriguing. I assume they have something to do with electricity.
They appear to be some electrical outlets, but
Yeah.
I don't think you have anything to be afraid of.
No, I'm just curious about it.
That's my idea.
But I'm a photographer, and I'm looking at this broad series of faces with these yellow boxes hanging with blue wheels. That's my craziness.
Well, that's an interesting observation because we like to know more about you as an artist, as a photojournalist. How do you go about seeing the world?
Well, by seeing blue wheels with yellow boxes. And the oddity of something like that, I get curious about what it's doing. Obviously, it's electrical supplies for probably computers you pull down and plug into. So the curiosity is in what I see. And that's what causes me to be a photographer, because my eyes are open, I see many things, and when I pick up a camera, I focus on, and that focus denotes that my thoughts are gone. And that's what I think about, and I do see research, finding out what they're talking about. For example, there's a young lady with a Japanese, let's see, is that a Nikon or a Nikon camera?
Yeah,
a Nikon camera. Why is she carrying a Nikon camera? Do you enjoy it? Do you use it much?
Yeah, I'm a reporter for the New Haven Independent.
Ah, okay.
Well,
what's that?
I also photograph, yeah.
And so now, if I was a dirty old man, I would like to see your portfolio. But I'm not my wife is here, so I cannot be a dirty old man.
But you're sharing these kind of observations reminds me of the many people who are artists, be they photographers or painters or writers, have a great capacity for not only observation but for curiosity. What is the story perhaps behind what is being seen? I understand that one of your most provocative and influential projects was a project you did called The Power of the Image as Political Tool.
Yes.
Could you say a little bit more about that project?
Yes. What it is that in the 60s, I came of age with photography. And in Union Square, my mentor had an apartment on Union Square, Alexei Brodovich, and he looked at me, and I talked to him about...
in New York.
In New York, yes. Excuse me. That's New York City, Union Square. Anyway, he looked out and he said, there's your project. And there were people gathering around to do a political protest. So I went down and I started photographing, and that got me involved with the politics of the events. And that's what my first big project was, The Power of the Image as a Political Tool. So how photography was used to incite people, to get people curious, to get involved. And that's what did it in Union Square. And that's my mentor, Alexei Brodovich, was the instigator of that.
What would you say is the difference between being a photographer and being a member of the paparazzi?
Oh, as a photographer, you have a choice of being an artist. And as an artist, you create, you develop, you manufacture something of interest. Paparazzi, you grab. And I'm not a grabber. Although my wife may think so at times. But no, I'm not a grabber.
What got you into the medium of the camera versus the paintbrush as an artist? How did you find yourself behind a camera?
What happened was, I grew up in East Harlem. The school system was wonderful, but it had problems. One of the problems it had, I suffer from dyslexia. They had no idea what dyslexia was at the time. I'm talking about the 40s, the 50s. And I had problem reading. And so that problem of reading developed me to look at pictures, to get the information out of the images. And that's what developed my photography. I developed images. Then I went to work in high school in a processing laboratory on 23rd Street, and it went from there.
Well, you know, artists often look for opportunities, and it's a rare event that an artist would meet up in a historical moment and be an eyewitness to the events that you have photographed. We're here to discuss what unfortunately became the last year of Dr. King's life. Could you tell us how that relationship developed, and how was it that you became to be his photographer during that last year?
Well, what happened there is it's somewhat of a funny story. First of all, my wife's family came from Estonia to Canada. We went to visit the relatives in Canada. On the way, I stopped in Rochester. I got an assignment from the head of the photography department at Eastman House, George Eastman House in Rochester, and I started photographing for them. And that developed into me starting the politics of it and going in forward, and that's what did it. Now, when I got going into photography, I had the projects. And the first project was the public Eastman House, not Eastman House, Union Square with the politics. And that branched out to Alexei Brodovich and the arts world. And I developed from that.
How did you first meet Dr. King?
Well, Dr. King, when I went to a demonstration, he was there. And you'll see the portraits of Dr. King in front of the UN on April the 15th, 1967. And I photographed him. And I first there's three pictures. One with Dr. King sitting over, looking straight at you. Then another one with him surrounded by his bodyguards. And the third one, I jumped up on a table and photographed down. He's in front of the UN. And then I developed them, made the prints. I got one published in the New York Times. I went down to Dr. King in Atlanta to show him the work. He met with me, we talked. While I was having lunch there, he was sliced up these green things and breaking them on their food, his food. I was there. There's in the pictures, you'll see me, or a picture of we at the dinner table with Coretta and Dr. King and three other people. And then my plate is empty. And I broke up the food like Dr. King did. I started eating it, and it was hot peppers. Well, I enjoy
like these here.
That's right, just very much like these.
These are hot peppers.
And so what happened was that these other people see these green things. They started breaking them up, and they started, oh my God, it's hot. And they were drinking water, and Dr. King looked at me and he said, you like hot food? I said, yes. He says, it's very good for you in the winter. It warms you up, and in the summer it cools you. I said, oh, okay. So we talked about the hot peppers and the food. And the next thing you know, he invited me to stay over, and I became his photographer. And that's how I got started with him, over a lunch and dinner at his place. I met his family and became friends.
Could you tell us a little bit about your impression of him as a person? So many people, particularly this current generation, only knows him as a historical figure. What kind of person was he to you?
Okay, he surrounded himself with Andy Young, Julian Bond, Reverend Abernathy, Dr. King, and Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson was the youngest. And they were all there to assist him. But he was the boss. I mean, when I say the boss, he was the guy that dictated what was said and how it was said. And Abernathy was there just reassurance. If any problem came up, Abernathy would sit him and become the old line minister and were able to speak. Jesse Jackson would have his position. And so that's what the group that was around him, how did they function. I came in and started photographing them. They were not sure of me. One, I was not black. And two, what was I doing there? I was there from a Canadian newspaper. So I was photographing, and Dr. King started talking to me, and he got to understand what I was doing. I was talking about the power of the image as a political tool, the politics of photography, and so on. And so he accepted me. When he accepted me, the others fell into place, and I no longer had a problem. And I started working with him, coming down back and forth to Atlanta, photographing him at several different occasions, and so on.
You mentioned your long 55-year relationship with your wife and the beautiful person she is. What was your impression of Mrs. King, Coretta?
Coretta, Dr. King was business. And he was my friend, but if you know him, he never wandered away from his goal of being a minister and being the leader of this third world people, how it was done. Coretta was the soul. She was there. She answered the questions. She was courteous. When he was short shrift, she would come up and say, well, he's busy today, or, he's under pressure. So she was always there to soften the blow. And that she did it very adequately. And she was a wonderful person. I became very good friends with her. And then after when Dr. King was killed, I really worked with her on all the different projects.
I first saw Dr. King in person in 1966. I was 16, and we came to our local church. And, of course, being...
Excuse me, you're 14 years younger than me. Should I talk to this young guy?
What can I say? I remember, because I was sitting close to him, being one of those kind of young clergy people in my congregation, my church, but I was so excited and at the same time intimidated. And the first thing I remember was he was he was much smaller than I imagined him to be. But yet, as he talked, as Coretta would say years later, as he talked, he got bigger and bigger, larger than life. Was that your impression?
Oh, yeah. When I went down to see him, I saw these photographs of him, and basically he looked like about my size, and so on. When I went down to visit him, he was like only 5'7". He was not that tall, but he had a voice. When he spoke, you listened, because he had a way of projecting his voice so that everybody understood what he was saying and how he was saying it. And that was his message.
Of all the photographs you've taken, let me start somewhat at an extreme end. Which photographs for you, not from an artistic standpoint so much, but from an emotional standpoint, would be some of your most difficult for you to even look at yourself at this stage of looking back on history?
Well, the one that's the most, I talk about it the most, but it's the most difficult for me personally, and that's Bonnie seeing her father in the casket dead for the first time. Because she was with her grandmother, they were trying to keep her from seeing him in the casket, and she broke away, ran over, and came between her sister and brother, and looked in and said, "Oh, Daddy!" And that was the most. And I hit myself in a sense because I took the picture. I should have not, but I was the photographer, and I was able to get the picture. Now, that picture I can share. If I had not taken it, I couldn't share it. I would just talk about it. So I think I did the right thing, but it gave me the most difficulty, that particular image. And that was because a little girl seeing her father for the first time dead. Very painful.
As an artist, photographer, is it instinctive for you when to take a picture, or is it more studied, or is it a combination?
No, I, like a lot of the photographers, go and read all kinds of things and do all kinds of preparing themselves. I go in cold. I accept what comes in front of me, and the decisive moment when I take the show. Yeah. And when do I determine the decisive moment? When I'm there and when it happens in front of me. I do not. I'm not one that studies and makes prescribed thoughts that I'm going to get a certain picture. No, it happened. What you see is what I got.
About how many pictures, you may know the exact number, how many pictures did you take of Dr. King in that last year?
The show is about 80 pictures, 78 pictures. Of that, that's about 4%, 5%. That 80 pictures is about 4% of the group of that one time, that year of King. Then after the funeral and Washington and all that, so it's about 2,000 or 3,000 images easily.
Was there ever a moment when you were about to take a picture and something instinctively said to you, you know, this is history in the making, right here, right now?
Well, what happened was when I was home, my birthday was April the 5th, and I heard on April the 4th, King was killed. I ran into New York, to the New York Times, and I saw the picture editor, which is a friend of mine, and I said, Dr. King was killed. And they didn't believe me. And I said, yes, he's been killed. I just heard it. I spoke with his secretary. And they turned the news on, and Walter Cronkite was talking. Nothing, said nothing. Then all of a sudden he broke in and said, there's a bulletin. Walter Cronkite says, Dr. King has been shot in Memphis. With that, the New York Times people said, here's a check, go. And the next 10 days, I was on the road photographing the King funeral, the family, everything. And it was an experience. It was an experience. And that was the time that I transcended from being a photographer and being a chronicler of the times. And not the New York Times, the Times.
Right. Well, prior to Dr. King's assassination, the year leading up to that, when you were taking photographs, was there ever a moment when you felt some tension between the boundaries of being a photographer and being a friend?
Oh, with Dr. King, yes. Because as I became friendly with him, I wanted to take the good pictures, only good pictures. But I've got a picture of Dick Gregory and Dr. King, which you're not going to see. I have the picture of Dr. King sort of giving a look like, ha ha, I got it, that type of look. And I refused to let anybody see it. So I tell you of it, but you have to your imagination.
I remember seeing a photograph of Dr. King in an airport with Andy Young,
Hmm.
and he was smoking.
That's unusual.
And he had a cigarette. And I spoke to Andy about that years later. He said, well, Dr. King didn't want people to know that occasionally he would light up.
Yes, occasionally, but very rare.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember seeing it, and I couldn't, as a young person, it was like seeing the Pope take a drink of whiskey.
Yeah,
The Pope probably drinks good whiskey. Better whiskey than I drink.
Well, it's probably an Italian
Whiskey, yeah. Oh, why?
Oh, yes. You sort of hit me from left field because you posed a question that I was aware of, but I did not talk about it. But King smoked, but it was not something that you looked at and thought about it. In fact, he very seldom did it. And I think when he did smoke, it was because it was a matter of relaxation. And that he was doing it to make the people relax because other people were smoking and he would smoke then. But it never was that, carried a cigarette. And I was with him quite a bit. He never carried a cigarette or a pack of cigarettes, took it out, smoked. Now, my mother and father smoked, and they were, all the time. My mother had brown, so I know smokers, and he was not a smoker.
Right. Do you recall any pictures or a picture that for you brings a deep sense of laughter or a big smile on your face? One of those occasions was just...
Okay, very few people got into the house to photograph. I was very fortunate.
The house in Atlanta.
In Atlanta, yes. And I've got a picture of Coretta and Martin sitting together, and I had just told a joke, and he was laughing, and she was laughing, and that's one of the positive times. He got a good sense of humor, too. Dr. King had a good sense of humor. I'm trying to think of one that he was always, he's got such a permanent position in my head of being a stalwart business, reverend and so on. But when he told a joke occasionally, but I can't think of one right now that would do justice, so I'm not going to do it.
Okay. Andy told me that he liked to play a lot of practical jokes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes, he was a practical joker.
Well, something just ran across your mind.
No. I'm trying to think of exactly how to bring it up. But no, he was a practical joker. He would get, he was doing it to Abernathy. Because Abernathy, you would see him, Dr. King would be talking and so on and so forth and Abernathy would be there. And Dr. King would say, "Shh, let him sleep. He's better off that way."
Well, given the 80 pictures or so that's here on exhibition, and perhaps 4,000 or so that's in the whole archive, what would you hope the legacy of these pictures would be?
Well, what I would hope is that the story of King. Now, we all know what the newspapers and the television and all the thing on, this has King at home, gives a rounded picture of King. That's what I hope. That eventually all of these pictures are all copies of them, went to the King family and the Martin Luther King Foundation. So they're already there. So hopefully at some point, a young person at the King Center would decide to make an in-depth view of King's life during this period of time. Now, there were other photographers there, were friends of mine, so there's a lot of other pictures that are available easily gotten of King that should be gotten, but it would take a young person the time to research it and bring it down. And before I go, if there's my wife sitting there, she's going to say, "What'd you do that for?" I invite anybody that thinks about it, please contact me. I'll try to arrange so that this could be searched out. I'll get in touch with either one of the King family or somebody to do the research on all these other pictures that I know are there.
I remember some years ago I had the unexpected but happy occasion to have a nice long lunch with Mrs. King, with Loretta, in Atlanta. And it was just four of us sitting at a table and talking. And one of the things that I remember about her, along with what you've already said, is the insightfulness that she carried. I mean, she was a very penetrating person in the sense of her thinking. She was very sharp. She was far more intellectual than perhaps some people would think of when they think of her.
Oh yeah. Well, she was a graduate of a school here in the Boston area.
Right, the music conservatory.
That's right. And she was quite, she knew her husband, and she knew how to deal with him, and she had the kids, and she dealt with the kids properly. The only other thing that sort of got my curiosity, she brought up the kids, but they never got married. In other words, Bonnie is still, doing her father's work. Dexter is out in California. Martin III is doing his father's business. The oldest daughter died at a young age, and Coretta has passed away. And they've never really gone on their own and set a family and so on. I don't know. I'm curious about it, but I'm not going to ask. It's none of my business.
How would you say, having this opportunity to photograph Dr. King, particularly that last year, how did it impact your life as a person and as a photographer?
Well, as a photographer, I got the job done. I became friends. I was a good photographer. As a person, what King represented was a different way of thinking. A religious way that he was, a religious man. But it wasn't my religion. But he gave me the understanding that religion was important, as you could see in the pictures. When I made the pictures, I introduced religion in it, the way he dealt with it, and so on. So it gave me a different way of dealing as a photographer and as a recorder of images.
What would you say to young people that would hear this discussion? How would you encourage them to understand the power of photography? Would you encourage them to become photojournalists like you've been?
Well,
and still are.
Yeah, yes, thank you. I was joking with these two guys here and this young lady because they've got the cameras and the computers. You've got the vehicle to get your thoughts out. You manipulate that machine to get your thoughts out to the majority of people. Do you have a desire? If you don't have a desire to do that, be my guest and stop. But if you have that desire, the more you work, the more broader message goes out to the world, the more you have to say, and say as much as you can. I'm not picking on you, but you're good looking. Otherwise,
how does that kind of work as a photojournalist? How is it impacted, or what's the competition with YouTube and other fast media exposure type opportunities people have now?
Well, I don't discuss it as competition. These are vehicles in which to get the word out. These vehicles, the only competition that you have is convincing them that you're the right person that they should expose your thoughts. And that's the difficulty, because most of these vehicles, newspapers, magazines, television, they have their criteria, and it may not be yours, but you've got to learn how that they adapt their criteria to become yours, or yours becomes theirs. And that's because you got to get the message out.
Do you consider yourself an artist?
Oof. I'm going to ask my wife this. She's going to, don't do that
I
to
was
me.
actually going to interject something there.
Yeah, be my
on
guest.
on your last question. Ben has had interns ever since he retired. Many of them were students of his former students, and quite a few of them from Germany, because the German students had a better work ethic than American students did, quite frankly. A major shift came when the early interns were film cameras. Then there were a couple of students that were getting familiar with digital but still doing film. And then the last few have been digital only. And we have basically decided to do no more interns. And the reason is, when they would come, whether they would live with us actually, when they came from Europe, they had a 2 or 3 month visa, so they lived with us that length of time. American students, if they were from, let's say, California, they lived with us. If they lived in New York, they came on a daily basis. But whatever they were, they had to come with a project. Most of them were photography students, still studying photography, especially the ones in Europe. And Ben said, you have to come with a project in mind, that when you leave here, you go with a finished, critiqued portfolio, and actually a grade from him, because he was educated known worldwide. And students, what that required is they had to work on some project, not just take pictures. And some of them were very interesting, some of them less so, but it was a project from concept to photographing. Ben would help them with darkroom work if that was necessary, editing. We have a gallery. I would help them how you curate the show, the whole package.
So you're saying there seems to be a little shift from that kind of work
Huge
versus
shift,
digital?
because when you're a young photographer, film costs money. Each strip of film had just so many images on it, and then you have to process it, and then you have. So you couldn't just go and just waste a lot of film. So you couldn't go around just snap willy-nilly, hundreds of shots. Not true with digital. The first totally digital intern came from Germany, and Ben asked him, well, so what's your project? New York. What about New York? Well, what do you mean, what about New York? So he went and did New York. Then had to sit there looking at hundreds of shots of New York. But absolutely no editorial thought of any kind. Like, where did he want to end up with these pictures of New York?
I understand. I get it.
And that's...
I understand the dilemma and the challenge of this kind of technology. You know, soon after Dr. King was assassinated, in many African American homes, you would go into the kitchen or the living room, and there would be 3 pictures on the wall.
Go ahead, yes, yes.
Sometimes 4, but 3.
Yeah.
One picture of Jesus, one picture of John F. Kennedy,
Yeah.
and the other Martin Luther King. Now, depending upon the home, King may have been replaced with Malcolm, but that varies. Or sometimes all 4,
All
but
4,
definitely
yeah.
the 3. Jesus Christ as imaged down
Yeah.
the centuries. John F. Kennedy, President Kennedy, and Dr. King. When you think about people creating their own art space, their own photography space for memory, what strikes you about that kind of presence in people's homes, that trilogy?
Well, that trilogy points out the value that these people put on the important things in their life. 1, their God. 2, what was it?
Kennedy. With their government.
And their government, and 3, Martin Luther King. And King had a big place. And usually the King picture, if they were black, was a bigger, more presented place. If they were intellectual, it was more or less Kennedy with King very close or parallel. And if they were religious, then God was the primary. Malcolm, if they were a Muslim. And basically that was it. The situation is such that as a photographer, you got to weigh the fact of all of these people and what their preferences were to the individual, and then how you make the image. And that's how I dealt with it all the time.
Ben, thank you for being who you are, and thank you
Oh, wait a
for the
minute.
journalists.
Well, oh, thank you.
We're going to open up to the audience.
All right, well, before I do, before we get started, I got to do an Abernathy improv. Okay. All right.
This is your opportunity now for the audience to ask questions of Mr. Fernandez. Who would like to begin?
They got to be intelligent, dynamic, and right to the point. Did that make it?
Yes, sir.
I'll ask a question. How did working or photographing Dr. King change or impact your life?
Whew. You should ask my wife. No, what it did was the way he functioned and the way he focused things gave me a better understanding of my craft of photography. I had to take his point of view and translate it for myself to make better images. And that King did. The way he decided how he said something and how he did it made it impressive with me so that I could focus in the same way. I hope I answered it.
First of all, I love the photo of the dining room table, the Sunday dinner picture. I think that's beautiful. And my second question, well, my first question.
Well, you're not so bad looking, so what? Oh, my wife is here.
I'm giving photo ops. But anyway, did you ever?
You know, they're handsome men in the room.
Yeah, but
Did you ever get any pictures of what I call the crew at Pascal's in Atlanta? Because when I was a student, I was able to see Martin Luther King, Julian Bond, Jose Williams. They all used to hang out at Pascal's restaurant in Atlanta. Did you ever capture?
I have some pictures at the restaurant. Hosea Williams and I would go there and sit and eat. He loved the place.
Yes.
And I got some pictures there of him, but I don't have.
But you do.
Oh
have
yeah.
some
Oh yeah.
Pascal's.
Yeah.
And were you able to see, or did you see the play Mountain Top?
No, I didn't. I haven't seen.
Okay.
Thank you. Someone from the back want to ask the question? Here? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes. Then you told a really interesting story about Bill Cosby. Can you tell that really briefly? I thought it was interesting on a lot of reasons about the picture of Bill Cosby and when you took his shot.
Well, Bill Cosby, he was not happy with me, and he gave me a little difficult time. That's all. I mean, how did I relate the story to you?
About he was mad at you.
Yeah, oh yeah, he was definitely mad at me.
He was mad at you, and he the time you were trying to get in the funeral.
Yes.
Yeah, that was really interesting to me.
Well, yeah, that was because he looked around, and I was told by Coretta to get in to photograph in there, and he wouldn't let me in because I was the wrong color. Basically it. And he couldn't comprehend how I had this authorization from Coretta when he didn't, so that was a bit of a problem. But that was because he didn't know me, and Coretta hadn't talked to him yet. If Coretta had spoken to him, I wouldn't have probably had a problem. But that's,
There's a gentleman behind you.
yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Is this astute, very intelligent
Oh,
question?
yes.
Okay.
Actually, the image that is most challenging to you is perhaps my favorite, the little girl looking at her dad
Oh.
in the casket for the first time,
Yeah.
because I think as a father, especially of a little girl, it speaks to my heart and what I want to do in her life. My question to you is, I'm pretty sure you don't use digital photography, but in your opinion, because of the extreme ability of anybody and everybody to distribute images over Facebook and Instagram and everything else, is that improving the art of photography and people's creativity, or is it a hindrance?
My wife just
I
answered
see
you.
what you're
Emphatically.
I'm just asking your opinion.
Essentially, what it does do, which is positive, it broadens the field. In other words, I could take a digital image today, and within minutes, I can have it out to thousands of people, which is positive. Now, if I want it that way, it's positive. Then again, I'm very private, and I keep it to myself. I don't want it that way. Now, if I lose control of an image, that's the dangerous part, and that's what you got to be careful of.
Can I put my 2 cents in
No,
on this
just
one?
a second for a minute. Ben,
Yeah.
what about the picture that's in your mind that you didn't take? Can you describe one of those? The picture you didn't take, but
Yeah,
it's still in your
yeah,
mind.
yeah. Well, Dr. King, his relationship, I've only taken 1 or 2 of humor, because as you notice, the one that I got of his with Coretta and Dr. King together laughing and joking, that's humor. But of Dr. King, he could tell a good joke. And I was there, but I was involved with listening to the joke and not taking the picture. So that's, you know, Miss Honey?
What I wanted to say is the digital technology has made it incredible, but it has affected the thinking process. And that's what I tried to say earlier with the interns, that it is disposable. It's easily disposable. And so the whole attitude is everything is disposable. I wonder 50 years from now where the comparable bodies of work will be from digital telephones. It's really the equipment, the technical part is fantastic. And then photographs digital. But I told him the other day, when he used to use his Leica, it was part of his physique. It was as if it was rubber. Because between all this manipulation, it was part of him. It was absolutely part of him. The digital camera is only a plastic box. It's a whole different kind of involvement.
Yes. And this is my beautiful wife of 42 years.
For 42 years, there you go.
If you had the opportunity today to spend a year photographing anyone in the world, who would it be and why?
I would like to photograph our president. And the reason for that is, one, when I was growing up, the chance of a man like he becoming president was never perceived possible. The fact that he did it intrigues me because he's an intellect that I can't comprehend, but it must be massive. And that's why I would like to hang around to see how he thinks, how he talks, how he does things, because it's amazing. And I have discussion with my wife. She thinks he's a little bit too professionally the way he talks. But when I listen to him, he's very precise, and he's very detailed, and I appreciate that. So if you arrange it, I'll go. Okay?
She's calling him now. Another question or comment from Jerry? I'm sorry. Yeah. Tom? Am I missing someone over?
Yeah, the photographer.
Mr. Fickle.
Ben, I have taken a few pictures, and even in
What did you say? You've taken some pictures?
I've taken a few.
Is that what you've taken with that thing in your hand?
Ostensibly. And there is an emotional commitment just to taking a casual shot. When you took the pictures of Dr. King, you did not expect that these would be the last pictures taken. So that had to have an emotional reaction to you when the event happened. So my question is, talk a little bit, if you could, about the Poor People's Campaign. You're covering on, you're continuing the legacy. I'm assuming that even propelled you to be more committed to talk about, to capture the Poor People's Campaign.
Well, when I got involved with King, I was covering a dissenter. He was a person protesting, as all Americans have in this country, the right to complain to your government. As I got to know him, I got him to realize he was not just a protester. He was a believer, and he shared his belief. And I can quickly come to understand it between Abernathy and Andy Young and them, how they followed him and how they believed in him caused me to have the same feeling. So that's what the charm and the capability of King was. He was a convincer. He convinced people to understand. He convinced people to understand the feelings. I can go on and on, but that is.
Yes, ma'am.
Was there any time that you were ever in danger while you were shooting?
Yeah. In fact, King's funeral, not the King's funeral, King was killed, and there was all kinds of flights out of New York to go to Atlanta. So I ran out to the airport. I didn't buy a ticket. I just jumped on a plane. The Democratic committee said, "Come on, I'll take you." They landed in Washington because they were picking up. I got off, and I went to 14th and U. If you knew Washington, that's the black section. And I went there to photograph. Now, I'm not black, so I'm walking around, and these guys, "What are you doing up here, honky?" And, and I'm there, and I see this guy, and I look at him, and I started taking him. He said, "Oh, man, give me your camera." And I said, "Oh, get out of my face." And I started jiving him, just like I grew up in Spanish Harlem. I give him the same BS he was giving me. So all of a sudden, he sees me taking my camera off, and I whip right one, and I take the Leica, and I swing around and hit him on the side of his head and put a big knot. Boom. And he's shocked. Then I hit him with the Nikon, it fell apart. Japanese equipment is not as good as German. Anyway, the wind-up was, there was a sergeant with the 82nd Airborne. He comes with his Jeep, says, "Man, get out of here before these guys wipe you out." So he drives me out to a press headquarters where they've got a truck, and they're bringing people back into the black area to photograph. All these honkies are on the truck, and we're going back and taking pictures. And these guys that were trying to kill me were there saying, "Yeah, we're going to get you," and they're pointing at me. And I said, "Oh, man." Fortunately, the Army was protecting me. The wind-up was, I took more pictures, they got me out of there, and that was the time was I'm most scared. Okay?
Yes, sir.
What was the most important historical period in your mind that you captured?
When King was with Dick Gregory in Chicago, and they were talking to the American Nazi Party was outside protesting, and they had to get out of there without having the Nazis do something stupid. And that was the more difficult time. Is that answer your question?
It's It's a good answer.
I remember that time because I was born and raised in Chicago, and when the Nazi, in Cicero, Illinois, the Nazi organization made sure that what turned out to be, Dr. King said, one of the most violent, bloody demonstrations that he'd ever experienced, even in the South. The entire city was on pins and needles. Yeah. And the black community was intensely on pins and needles because of the reputation that the Nazis had in cooperation with the Ku Klux Klan. And Chicago Police Department in 1968 was not our friend either. So it was a very difficult time.
I gotta say that's a good answer too.
One thing happened at that time. There was a group of young people that were positive with dissent, and they had flowers and they were hippies basically, and they were going, and I got involved with them just before I went to the Nazi party. And so they were having these flowers. I took some of the flowers and I put them in my ear and my glasses, and I went and I was photographing, jumping around with them. And then I left and went to the Nazi party. Now I forgot the flowers. And I knock on the door and I come into the Nazi headquarters. "What are you doing here, you hippie?" I said, "What are you talking about? I'm not a hippie. What are you doing with flowers in your hair?" "Oh, man, I was disguised." And I throw them down there. That's the most dangerous time. It was wacky. Whew.
Other questions from the back or somewhere else? Ben, may I ask you this? Even now, all these years...
For you, 25 cents. That's okay.
All these years later, on the anniversary of Dr. King's assassination, it feels like to me like it was that day. My grief is still very raw, very tender.
April the 4th, 1968.
Absolutely. And I weep on those anniversaries. How your photography and others like it, but particularly your photography, while on the one hand it could be difficult to look at some of the images, on the other hand, it can also be a source of healing. Have you ever thought about the work that you do as contributing to a sense of healing?
Well, like what you have right now, this show has been traveling. This show has traveled 27 different countries in Africa, all through Europe, through the United States. And every time it's been seen, somebody has contacted me and said, "Great set of pictures, wonderful, I'm glad you're doing it." These images are keeping the King experience alive. As long as he's still alive through my images, I've been successful.
I have nothing against gates, I have nothing against roads, but are Fulbright scholars bad? Any closing remarks?
Thank you for coming again. As I said, this will be the first of many events like this. Ben, thank you. Siri, thank you so much for traveling so long to be with us this evening. Welcome. Thank you so much. I
think we have 43.
Yes.
Right?
Welcome. Have a good night.
Can I take these with me?